The wind was blowing hard that Sunday morning, kicking up swirls of dust that stuck to my shoes and dried out my throat. When I closed the church doors, I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the weather, a sharp pain in the pit of my stomach that I blamed on fasting, or maybe on Pastor Damien's sermon about Judas's betrayal. My name is Eleanor, and even though my birth certificate says I have walked this earth for 72 years, my legs still felt steady, and my mind was as clear as spring water. I never imagined, not even in my worst nightmares, that the real Judas didn't wear a tunic or kiss cheeks in an olive grove, but instead shared my own blood, had my own eyes, and bore the name I had chosen for her with so much love. I walked back home with my black-covered Bible pressed tightly against my chest, like a shield. I was not a helpless widow crying in the corners, nor a bitter spinster. I was a divorced woman, and a very proud one at that. It had been more than 25 years since I had kicked my ex-husband out of my life and my house, sick and tired of his drunken binges and empty promises. That house, my refuge with its white walls and red shingled roof, had not been gifted to me by anyone. I had paid for it myself, penny by penny, sewing for others until my fingers went numb and selling homemade baked goods at the town square on weekends. That house was my trophy, my freedom, my kingdom. As I turned the corner onto my street, Elm Street, I thought about what I would make for lunch. Maybe some lentil stew, something warm to fight off the cold wind. I also thought about my daughter, Melissa. For weeks I had noticed she was acting strange, evasive, always talking in a low voice on her cell phone whenever she came to visit, or insisting with a sickeningly sweet tone that I should rest more and stop worrying about the upkeep of the property. "Mom, this house is too big for you to live in all by yourself," she had told me the previous Thursday while we drank tea in the kitchen. "The plumbing is old, the roof needs repairs. You should go to a place where they can take care of you, where you don't have to clean so much." I had laughed, a dry and sharp laugh. "And leave my rose bushes? Leave my sewing room? You must be crazy. They will have to carry me out of here in a pine box." Oh, how wrong I was. I didn't even have to die for them to try and throw me out. I arrived in front of my wrought iron gate. I rummaged through my purse, past the tissues and my coin purse, looking for the keychain with the image of St. Jude that had been with me for decades. I pulled out the long, jagged key, familiar to my touch, and slid it into the lock. Or at least I tried to. The key wouldn't go in. I frowned, thinking I had maybe grabbed the backyard key by mistake. I looked at it closely. No, it was the usual key. I tried again, pushing a little harder, twisting my wrist with impatience. Metal clashed against metal, refusing to give way. It was then that I leaned in a bit and adjusted my glasses to get a better look. The lock cylinder was shining. It was brand new, a flashy, bright gold without a single scratch, clashing violently with the dull, aged iron of the rest of the gate. My heart skipped a painful beat, as if it had tripped and fallen inside my chest. I took a step back, looking at the front of my house. The living room curtains, the ones I had embroidered myself with silk threads, were gone. In their place, cold and gray metal blinds were pulled all the way down to the floor. "What is this?" I whispered, feeling like I couldn't catch my breath. I slammed the palm of my hand against the gate. The metallic sound echoed down the empty street. "Melissa, Melissa, open up!" I yelled. Even though a quiet inner voice, that motherly intuition we often ignore to avoid the pain, was already screaming the truth at me. No one answered. The silence of the house was absolute, a graveyard silence. I took out my cell phone, a simple model I barely used for calls and texts, and dialed my daughter's number with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, she answered. "Mom?" Her voice sounded tense, rushed, with the background noise of an engine and the wind, as if she were driving down the highway. "Melissa, I am outside the house. The key won't go in. They changed the locks, and—" She cut me off before I could finish. There was no small talk, no softness, not even that fake concern she had shown a few days prior. Her tone was like an executive closing a business deal, cold and final. "Mom, do not try to get in. I had the locks changed early this morning, right after you left for the 8 o'clock service." I froze. The freezing breeze hit my face, but I didn't feel it. I only felt the coldness of her words. "What are you talking about? What do you mean you changed the locks? This is my house, Melissa. Open this door right now." "It is not your house anymore, Mom," she said, and I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end of the line. "We sold the house. I signed the papers yesterday using that power of attorney you gave me last year for the bank stuff. Remember? The buyer was in a hurry. The money already hit the account, Mom. It is a lot of money." The world stopped spinning. The power of attorney. That piece of paper I signed when I was hospitalized with pneumonia, just so she could collect my pension and pay the medical bills if I couldn't. Never, in my innocent state of mind, did I think that paper would be my death sentence. "You sold my house?" I asked, my voice reduced to a thin whisper, still in denial. "What about my things? My furniture? Your grandmother's portrait?" "Everything is safely stored in a unit, Mom. Please don't make a scene. It is for your own good. We used that money to pay for your admission to the Happy Sunset Retirement Home. It is all arranged. They have a beautiful room waiting for you. They are coming to pick you up in an hour. Just wait for them right there. We are heading to the beach for a few days to celebrate the deal and clear our heads." "Celebrate?" I repeated, feeling my disbelief turn into deep nausea. "You leave me out on the street and you go off to celebrate? Melissa, I am your mother. I worked like a mule to build these walls. Your father left us with nothing and I—" "Oh, Mom, here you go again with the sacrifice story." She cut me off, and for the first time, I noticed the absolute contempt in her voice. "You are old now. You cannot live alone. We did what was best. The house is sold, the money is secure, and you are going to be taken care of. Period. Don't make a scene. The neighbors are watching." And she hung up. The sound of the disconnected call felt like a gunshot. I looked at the phone in disbelief. I looked at the house. My house, now turned into an impenetrable fortress. I felt dizzy. My legs, which minutes before had held me up with pride, gave out. I let myself drop down onto the sidewalk, not caring about the dust or the cold concrete. There I was, Eleanor, the woman who had survived a stormy divorce, inflation, economic crises, and illnesses. I was sitting on the curb with my Bible in my lap and my purse clutched to my stomach, stripped of everything I owned in a matter of hours. I looked down the street. Mrs. Gertrude, the neighbor from across the way, peeked her nose through her window, moving the curtain. I was sure she already knew. In small towns and old neighborhoods, news travels faster than the wind. I felt a burning shame creep up my neck. The shame of having raised a monster, the shame of being seen as the foolish old woman who got scammed by her own daughter. God doesn't punish with a stick, but with a tongue, my mother used to say. What had I done to deserve this? Didn't I give her everything? Didn't I pay for her college tuition with the money from my sewing? The tears threatened to spill, hot and furious, but I held them back. No, I was not going to cry in front of the locked door of my own home. I wouldn't give Melissa the satisfaction of finding me broken, nor would I let the neighbors pity me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with that cold, dusty air. I touched the cover of my Bible. "The truth shall set you free," the verse said. But the truth, at that moment, was that I was out on the street. And freedom had a price my daughter had just cashed in. However, as my hand caressed the rough leather of the sacred book, a memory flashed through my mind like a lightning bolt. It wasn't a verse, nor a prayer. It was a name. Robert. Robert Bennett. We used to play together on this very street when the asphalt was still dirt and the ditches were full of tadpoles. Robert, the baker's son, who always defended me when the other kids made fun of my braids. Robert, who was no longer a boy covered in flour, but the chief of police for the district. We hadn't spoken beyond a polite greeting at the town square in years, but I perfectly remembered our last serious conversation, about 5 years ago, when he became a widower. "Eleanor, you are a woman of iron," he had told me with sadness and admiration. "If you ever need anything, absolutely anything, you know my badge and my friendship are entirely at your disposal." I looked at the watch on my wrist. It was 11 in the morning. Robert usually took the Sunday shift so he wouldn't have to be alone in his empty house. The initial despair, that sharp blow that knocks the wind out of you, started to turn into something else inside my chest. It was no longer pain. It was a burning coal. It was the same dignified rage I felt the day my ex-husband raised a hand to me and I pointed him to the door forever. That woman, the warrior Eleanor I thought had fallen asleep under layers of time and peace, opened her eyes. Melissa thought I was a fragile old lady who would obediently wait for someone to come and cart her off to a nursing home. She thought that power of attorney was a blank check to do whatever she wanted with my life. But Melissa had forgotten exactly whose daughter she was. She had forgotten that I inherited nothing. I built everything. And whoever knows how to build also knows how to demolish. I wiped away the single tear that had escaped down my left cheek with the back of my hand. I adjusted the shawl over my shoulders. I straightened my back and picked up my phone again. Not to call the retirement home, not to beg my daughter. I dialed the number for the 4th precinct, a number I knew by heart because it was painted on the wall of the neighborhood school. "4th precinct, good morning," a young, bored voice answered after the second ring. "Good morning," I said, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. It didn't shake. It was as hard as steel. "I need to speak with Chief Bennett. It is an emergency." "The chief is busy, ma'am. Who is calling?" "Tell him it is Eleanor Morales. Tell him I am sitting on the sidewalk outside my house, and if he doesn't come down here personally, I'm going to have to do something crazy." There was silence on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair scraping and muffled voices. "Eleanor!" Robert's voice sounded gravelly, unmistakable, filled with that natural authority that comes from years on the force, but with a hint of deep concern. "What is going on? Are you okay?" "No, Robert, I am not okay," I replied, staring fixedly at the gold lock that shone like a mocking eye on my door. "I am locked out of my house. Melissa changed the locks while I was at church. She says she sold it. She says she is sending me to a nursing home." I heard a muffled gasp on the other end of the line, a curse word that Robert would never say in public, but let slip with the trust of our old friendship. "She did what?" he roared. "You stay right there, Eleanor. Do not move. I am heading over in the cruiser. And listen to me carefully. No one is taking you anywhere if you do not want to go." I hung up the phone and put it back in my purse. I stayed there, sitting on the cold concrete, with my Bible in my hand, staring straight down the street. A car drove by slowly, and the driver looked at me with curiosity, but I didn't look away. I no longer felt ashamed. I felt the heat of the upcoming battle. Melissa thought the money was already safely in her account. She thought money was the only thing that mattered, that the law of the strongest meant the law of the youngest. But she didn't know that there are much older laws, pacts of loyalty forged in childhood, and above all, that there is an unstoppable force in a mother who has been betrayed. The wind kept blowing, but it no longer chilled me to the bone. Now the wind carried the distant sound of an approaching siren. I stood up, dusted off my skirt, and smoothed my hair. I was not going to welcome the law sitting on the ground like a victim. I would welcome it standing tall, as the lady and master of my own destiny. The war was just beginning, and my daughter was about to learn that you do not slam a door in Eleanor Morales' face. The sound of the siren wasn't a piercing wail, but a short, respectful chirp, as if the cruiser itself knew it was coming to assist a lady and not to chase down a criminal. I saw the blue and white vehicle turn the corner, breaking the gray monotony of the Sunday morning. The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the windows of the neighboring houses, and I noticed several curtains snap shut. People's curiosity is brave right up until the authorities show up. Then everyone suddenly goes blind and deaf. Robert stepped out of the car with deliberate slowness. The years had painted his hair silver and added some weight around his waist, but he still had that air of an old oak tree that not even a hurricane could knock down. He adjusted his duty belt where his service weapon rested and walked toward me. He didn't look at me with pity, and I thanked him for it in silence. He looked at me with the seriousness of someone assessing the damage after an earthquake. "Eleanor," he simply said, stopping a few feet away from me. His voice was deep, raspy from years of smoking in the past. "Robert," I replied, standing tall. My knees popped, but I kept my chin up. "Thank you for coming." He looked at the door, then at the gold lock that gleamed offensively under the cloudy sun, and finally looked back into my eyes. So she changed the locks without warning and sold the house, or so she claims. She says the money is already in her account and that they are coming to get me to take me to a retirement home. Robert let out a snort, a mix of an incredulous laugh and contained anger. He walked up to the gate and examined it. He ran his thick fingers over the cold metal. "This is an outrage, Eleanor, civil or criminal. It is an absolute outrage. Do you have your documents? Your ID? Everything is right here." I patted my purse. "And the original deed? Well, that is inside, in the small safe behind the closet, unless they already took it." Robert shook his head. He signaled to his partner, a young rookie who was watching the scene with wide eyes from behind the wheel, telling him to wait. "Listen to me, Eleanor. I could call a locksmith right now and bust this open. You have residency here. Your address is on your ID. The law protects your right to enter your own dwelling. But if we force our way in now and the new owners show up, or your daughter arrives with signed papers, it is going to turn into a massive public scene. And you do not deserve that kind of circus." "I don't want a scene, Robert. I just want my house." "I know. That is why we are going to do this by the book. Let's go down to the station. I have hot coffee and, more importantly, I have access to the registry and a phone to call Mr. Vance. Do you remember him? The old notary public." I nodded. Mr. Vance was an institution in this town, a man who knew the secrets of every family and every plot of land for 50 miles around. I climbed into the back of the cruiser. I felt the neighbors' stares digging into the back of my neck like needles, but I no longer cared. I sat on the back seat that smelled of old vinyl and cheap disinfectant. As the car pulled away, I took one last look at my house. It looked sad, foreign, like a dog waiting for an owner who is never coming back. Don't worry, I thought to myself, I will be back. Down at the precinct, the atmosphere was quiet. Robert took me into his office, a cubicle filled with stacked folders and a framed picture of his late wife on the desk. He poured me some black coffee into a tin mug. I burned my lips on the first sip, but the heat warmed me from the inside out. "All right," he said, sitting across from me and lacing his fingers together. "Tell me exactly what you signed. Melissa mentioned a power of attorney." I closed my eyes, trying to travel back in time to those blurry days in the hospital a year ago. The pneumonia had left me weak, coughing until I could taste blood. Melissa had showed up with a blue folder and a worried smile. "It was 14 months ago," I started explaining, measuring every word. "I was running a fever. She told me she needed authorization to collect my Social Security and pay the light and water bills while I was admitted. She brought a young notary, someone I didn't recognize. I skimmed it, or at least I thought I did. The letters were dancing on the page. I trusted her, Robert. She is my daughter." Robert nodded, writing something down on a notepad. The oldest mistake in the book and the most painful one, trusting blood when blood turns to muddy water. But a power of attorney to collect a pension is not the same as a power of attorney to sell real estate. To sell a house, you need a general power of attorney for acts of ownership. If you signed a limited one, that sale is null and void. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. I don't remember the exact title of the document. I only remember her holding my hand and saying, "Just sign here, Mommy. It's so you won't lack for anything." Robert picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number from memory. He spoke familiarly, throwing around legal jargon that I could barely understand. Protocol, public faith, defects, and consent. He hung up and looked at me with a spark of hope in his eyes. Vance is going to check the digital notary archives. If that power of attorney was registered in this district, he will find it. In the meantime, we are going to find out who bought the house. Melissa said they were in a hurry. Being in a hurry is the enemy of good business, Eleanor. It always leaves tracks. 2 hours went by. 2 hours where I watched the wall clock tick forward at an agonizingly slow pace. I ate a sandwich the young rookie brought me, even though the food tasted like cardboard, but I needed to keep my strength up. My mind, which was initially clouded by shock, began to clear up. I started connecting the dots. Melissa's mysterious phone calls, her insistence that I go visit my cousins out in the rural area last week, surely to show the house to the buyers without me being there, the gradual disappearance of some valuable items, like the silver candelabra and the mantel clock. They hadn't been misplaced like she claimed. She had been taking them out, little by little. Then Robert's phone rang. He answered quickly, listened in silence, and I saw his bushy eyebrows shoot up. Uh-huh. Yes, I understand. And the clause? He took a long pause, staring right at me. You don't say. Are you absolutely sure, Vance? A slow, almost predatory smile spread across his face. Thanks, old friend. I owe you a steak dinner. He hung up and let out a dry laugh. He slapped the palm of his hand against the desk. Eleanor, my dear woman, you have a very efficient guardian angel. Or rather, you had a very cunning lawyer when you got divorced. What are you talking about? I asked, leaning forward. Vance found the original deed to your house in the registry, the one from 25 years ago, and he also found the record for the power of attorney you gave Melissa. And? Well, the power of attorney, unfortunately, is a broad, general power. It includes acts of ownership. Melissa had you sign over total control, Eleanor. Legally speaking, she was well within her rights to sell the house in your name. I felt like the floor was opening up beneath my feet. The little air I had recovered rushed out of my lungs. So, I lost? I am really out on the street? Hold on, I am not finished. Robert held up a finger, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Melissa could sell the house, yes, and she did. She sold it to a real estate firm from the city, Future Real Estate LLC, a bunch of vultures who buy cheap to remodel and flip for a high profit. But Melissa and those vultures made a massive mistake. They forgot to read the fine print on your divorce settlement deed. I stared at him, completely confused. What fine print? When you divorced that scoundrel of a husband, the judge ruled the house would be awarded to you as compensation. But your lawyer, rest his soul, included a legal provision to protect you in case your ex ever tried to pull a dirty trick in the future. The house is under your name, but it has a life estate attached to it in your favor. The phrase echoed in my head. Life estate. I vaguely remembered the lawyer explaining that to me decades ago, telling me it was my ultimate life insurance policy. Over the years, with all the daily worries, I had completely forgotten about it. What does that mean right now, Robert? It means, my dear Eleanor, that Melissa sold the bare ownership. She sold the walls and the roof, yes, but she didn't sell the right to live there. A life estate means you have the absolute legal right to inhabit that house until the day you die. Nobody, not the new owner, not even the President of the United States, can kick you out of there without your explicit consent. I felt an electric current shoot down my spine. It wasn't fear, it was power, pure, raw power. And do they know that? I asked, my voice shaking with excitement. Apparently not, Robert replied, checking his notes. The real estate firm must have done a rushed, sloppy title search, blinded by whatever lowball price Melissa probably offered them. And your daughter? Well, she was never one to read legal documents thoroughly, was she? She thinks that by selling the property, she sold you right along with it. I brought my hands up to my mouth. A nervous laugh escaped my lips, followed by a deep, chilling realization. Melissa had cashed the check. She'd either spent it or stashed it away. She had signed a contract guaranteeing the delivery of an empty house. But legally, she couldn't deliver it empty. because I came with the house. If I claimed my right, the sale wouldn't fall through, but it would become completely useless for the buyers. They wouldn't be able to move in or remodel or flip it until I was dead, and I planned on living for many more years. What happens if the buyers find out? I asked. Oh, they are going to find out, Robert said. And when they do, they are going to sue Melissa for fraud and hidden defects. They will demand their money back plus damages. And if she already spent the cash, well, she is going to be in very serious trouble, possibly facing jail time. I sat in silence, processing the sheer magnitude of the twist fate had taken in a matter of minutes. I went from being a doomed, homeless old woman to having my finger resting right on the trigger of my own daughter's financial destruction. I thought about Melissa, about her cold voice on the phone. The money already hit the account. Don't make a scene. You are old now. I remembered every slight, every time she made me feel small and useless over the last few months. I remembered how she changed the locks while I was praying, using my faith against me to stab me in the back. Something inside me broke and put itself back together, but this time it was forged from solid iron. The selfless mother, the one who forgave everything, the one who always turned the other cheek, stayed right there in that chair at the precinct, fading away like smoke. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt with steady hands. "Robert," I said, and my voice sounded entirely different, deeper, more dangerous. "I do not want you to call Vance back just yet. I do not want you to notify anyone." He looked at me curiously. "What are you planning on doing?" "Melissa thinks I am defeated. She thinks I am waiting on the sidewalk for the retirement home van to show up. If I tell her right now that I have the life estate, she will look for a way to fix it, or she will return the money before spending it all, and she will just look for another way to get rid of me. No." I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. It was starting to drizzle. I want her to get overly confident. I want her to spend that money. I want her to truly believe she won. And when she is at the very peak of her arrogance, when the buyers show up to take possession, then and only then will I show them my hand. Robert smiled. It was a slow smile of absolute complicity. That is the Eleanor I knew when we were kids, the one who never lost a game of marbles. I was tame for years, Robert. I thought being a good mother meant giving in and keeping quiet. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. She died this morning when her key didn't open the door. So what is the plan then? He asked, standing up. First, I need to get back inside my house, not by force, but with cunning. You said the locksmith can open it if I prove I live there. Well, I have my ID. We are going to drill that door open. I am going to swap out that horrible, flashy gold lock for a brand new one. And I am going to wait inside, sitting on my armchair, knitting, just like the harmless little old lady they all think I am. "And when the retirement home people show up?" Robert asked. "Let them knock. I won't open the door. And if they insist, I will tell them to call the police, meaning call you." Robert let out a booming laugh. I like it. I like it a lot. "Come on, Eleanor, I will give you a ride home. And on our way we will call Smitty, my trusted locksmith. He doesn't ask questions and his rates are cheap." We walked out of the precinct into the fine rain. The air didn't feel cold anymore. It felt fresh, cleansing. I felt light. I had walked into that building as a victim, dragging my feet and my soul. I was walking out as a master strategist, with a secret weapon in my pocket and the unwavering will to use it. As the cruiser made its way back to Elm Street, I pulled out my cell phone. I had 3 missed calls from an unknown number. It was surely the Happy Sunset retirement home. I powered the phone off. The silence of the powered-down screen was my very first victory. Melissa wanted to play businesswoman. She wanted to play games with money and real estate. Perfect. I was going to teach her a lesson that you won't find in any college textbook or bank contract. I was going to teach her that you should never, ever underestimate the woman who taught you how to walk, because that same woman knows exactly how to sweep your legs right out from under you. The police cruiser stopped in front of my house. The gold lock was still there, mocking me, but it didn't intimidate me anymore. Now I saw it for what it truly was, a cheap ornament on a fortress that still belonged to me. "Wait here, Eleanor," Robert said, stepping out of the car. "The locksmith is pulling up." I kept staring at the front of my home. My rose bushes seemed to wave at me in the rain. "Relax," I whispered to them. "Mama is back." And for the first time all day, I smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried. The rain, which had started as a timid drizzle, turned into a steady downpour, the kind that washes the streets clean and darkens the sky at noon. From the passenger seat of the cruiser, I watched Smitty, Robert's trusted locksmith, work on my front gate. He was a short man with large, calloused hands, whistling an off-key tune as his drill chewed through the gold cylinder my daughter had installed just a few hours prior. The sound of breaking metal was high-pitched and screeching, but to my ears it sounded like heavenly music. It was the first battle cry of my reconquest. "All set, Miss Eleanor," Smitty said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag tucked into his belt. "That lock was all show, just shiny plating. Inside, it was cheap brass. I just installed the new one for you, a high-security double-cylinder deadbolt. Nobody's getting in here unless you want them to." Robert paid him and handed me the new keys. They were heavy, cold, and real. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Eleanor?" he asked, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Once you walk through that door, the game is on. If Melissa or the buyers show up, things are going to get incredibly ugly." I squeezed the keys in my fist until the metal edges dug into my palm. "Let it get ugly, Robert. I have lived through the beautiful and the ugly inside this house. I am not afraid of yelling. I am afraid of the silence of being forgotten. And I refuse to be forgotten today." I stepped out of the cruiser and walked toward the entrance. My Sunday shoes splashed in the puddles, but I didn't care. As I pulled the gate open, I felt a familiar resistance, the heavy weight of the iron I had pushed open thousands of times before. I walked in. The front yard felt strange. My potted geraniums and ferns were shoved against the dividing wall, some knocked over, the potting soil spilling across the concrete like black blood. Melissa hadn't even had the decency to move them carefully. She had literally kicked them out of the way to clear a path. I felt a pang of sorrow, but I swallowed it quickly. I picked up the first pot, straightened the broken stem of a red flower, and gently stroked its leaves. "Forgive her," I whispered to my plants. "She knows not what she does, but she is going to learn." I unlocked the main front door. The smell hit me immediately. It didn't smell like my house. It smelled like damp cardboard, packing tape, and stale, locked-up air. The afternoon light filtered through the lowered blinds, painting gray stripes across the hardwood floor. What I saw froze my blood for a split second. My living room was no longer my living room. It was a storage unit. Cardboard boxes were stacked up to the ceiling, my furniture, my green velvet sofa, my coffee table. Everything was covered in dirty plastic tarps. On the boxes, scrawled in my daughter's rushed handwriting with a thick black marker, were the words, "Donate, trash, sell." I walked up to a box labeled trash. I opened it with trembling hands. Tossed inside haphazardly were my photo albums, pictures from her baptism, photos of my parents, my wedding day, everything that held the memory of my family lineage thrown away like old scrap paper. My old sewing box was in there too, that round metal cookie tin where I kept the needles and threads I had used to stitch together the future of that ungrateful girl. I felt my knees give out, but the rage held me upright. I did not cry. I didn't have any tears left, only pure fire. I pulled the albums out and slammed them onto the table, ripping the plastic tarp off with a violent yank. I pulled out the sewing box. I marched into the kitchen. It was desolate. The pantry was bare, and the refrigerator was unplugged with the door propped open so it wouldn't grow mold. I plugged the fridge back in. The hum of the motor firing up sounded like the heartbeat of someone resurrected. "Thank you, Robert. You can go now," I told my friend, who was still standing in the doorway staring sadly at the disaster zone. "I'm going to have a patrol car circle the block every hour on the hour, Eleanor. Anything happens, you press one on your speed dial. Don't you worry. Tonight, I am going to sleep like a baby." When Robert left and I heard the engine of the cruiser fading away down the street, the silence fell over the house once more. But it wasn't a graveyard silence anymore. It was the silence of a general, right before the battle. I took off my coat, rolled up the sleeves of my blouse, and got to work. I couldn't unpack everything, but I could reclaim my territory. I shoved the boxes blocking the hallway out of the way. I went into my bedroom. There, the bed frame had been taken apart, the bare mattress leaning up against the wall. Melissa had been efficient, terribly efficient. I rummaged through the boxes until I found my bed sheets, the heavy flannel ones I used in the winter. I made the bed with almost religious meticulousness, smoothing out every single wrinkle. At around 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was a long, insistent buzz. I peeked through the peephole. A white passenger van with the Happy Sunset Retirement Home logo was double parked out front. 2 large, burly men and a woman in a nurse's uniform were standing on the sidewalk, impatiently checking their watches. My heart raced, but I remembered Robert's words. "The life estate is your shield." I took a deep breath. I smoothed my hair, unlocked the wooden door, but kept the security chain engaged and did not open the iron street gate. I stayed on the porch at a safe distance. "Good afternoon," the nurse yelled through the iron bars of the gate. "Mrs. Eleanor Morales, we are here to pick you up. Your daughter told us to expect you out here at 1, but we got delayed by the storm." I walked slowly up to the gate, but made no motion to unlock it. I looked at them with the mild curiosity you'd give an annoying door-to-door salesman. "Good afternoon," I said in a calm, steady voice. "I am Eleanor, but I believe you have made a mistake. I have not requested any services." The woman frowned and checked a clipboard she was holding. "It says right here that your admission is fully paid and coordinated by a Melissa Morales. We have your bed ready and the transfer order. Please open the gate. It is still raining and we are getting soaked." "My daughter could have paid for a trip to the moon if she wanted to, young lady," I replied, resting one hand on the cold iron. "But I am not going anywhere. This is my house. I am very comfortable right here, and I have absolutely no intention of leaving." One of the orderlies huffed loudly. "Ma'am, please do not make this difficult. Your daughter told us you might be a little disoriented. This is for your own good. The house is no longer yours. It has been sold. You cannot stay here all alone." I smiled, a sad, condescending little smile. "Young man, I am far more oriented than you are. I know exactly what day it is, I know exactly who I am, and I know that absolutely no one is removing me from my property without a court order signed by a judge. So please turn right around and tell my daughter she is more than welcome to use that nursing home room herself if she likes it so much." The nurse opened her mouth, highly offended, but something in my posture, perhaps the firm grip I had on the heavy Bible I had picked up again, stopped her dead in her tracks. "We are going to have to call your daughter and report this as a transfer refusal," she threatened. "By all means, call her. Tell her mother sends her regards." They turned on their heels, muttering under their breath, climbed back into the van, and drove off. I knew that was just the opening skirmish. The real bomb was about to drop. I went back inside and made myself a cup of tea in a small pot I managed to fish out, using tap water. I sat on a kitchen chair, the only one that wasn't wrapped in plastic, and waited. The phone rang 10 minutes later. The name Melissa flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I answered. "Hello?" I said, faking an exhausted, frail voice, slurring my words just a tiny bit. Robert's strategy: play defeated so she gets overconfident. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" Melissa screamed into the phone. I could hear loud music and laughter in the background. She was definitely already down at the beach. "The retirement home just called me. They said you refused to open the door for them. You are making me look like a fool, Mom. I paid a fortune for that specialized transfer." "Oh, sweetheart," I sighed, letting my voice tremble just enough. "It is just... I got scared. Those men were so big and I just wanted to say goodbye to the house." The background noise faded out. Melissa must have stepped out onto a balcony or gone into the bathroom to talk. "Say goodbye? Mom, you already said goodbye. The house is sold." "Sold? How did you even get inside?" I changed the lock. The door was left cracked open. Honey, the wind must have blown it open. I lied with a natural ease that shocked even myself. "I just came inside so I wouldn't get rained on. It is pouring out here. I'm so cold." There was a heavy silence. I could almost picture Melissa calculating her next move. She didn't want to drive all the way back from the beach. She didn't want to ruin her celebration just to come physically drag me out. She honestly believed I was just a useless, overly sentimental old lady who just wanted to have a good cry among the moving boxes. "Listen to me very carefully, Mom," she said, lowering her tone, trying to sound reasonable, the way you talk to a toddler throwing a tantrum. "The new owners, the real estate people, are going to be there tomorrow, Monday at 10 in the morning. They are bringing architects to take measurements. You absolutely cannot be there." "Just one night, Melissa," I pleaded, injecting a heavy dose of pathetic desperation into my voice. "Just let me sleep here one last night. Tomorrow I will go. I will go wherever you tell me to, but just let me sleep in my own bed one last time. Please." Melissa huffed. I could feel her impatience, her disgust, but also her overwhelming relief. I was handing her an easy way out. "Fine, one night. But tomorrow at 9 in the morning, I want you ready and waiting on the sidewalk. I am calling the home to have them pick you up at 9 sharp. And don't you dare touch any of those boxes. All of that is either inventory for the estate sale or literal garbage." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, and ended the call. I placed the phone down on the table and my entire face shifted. The mask of the begging, frail old woman dropped straight to the floor. My eyes, reflecting back at me in the dark glass of the kitchen window, burned with a fierce, unbreakable determination. "Inventory or trash?" I repeated out loud, tasting the venom of her words. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I did not unpack the boxes. On the contrary, I used them to my advantage. I moved a few to block easy access to the back bedrooms. I wanted the new owner's walkthrough to be uncomfortable, for them to stumble over the reality of a life that simply could not be boxed up. I found my old battery-operated radio. I turned it on and tuned into a classic jazz station. The music filled the emptiness of the house, chasing away the ghosts of loneliness. I sang while sweeping the floor in the entryway, scrubbing away the muddy footprints left by the orderlies and the locksmith. I wanted the house to be clean to receive my guests. Night fell, heavy and dark. The storm intensified. Thunder rattled the window panes, but I didn't feel any fear. I felt protected by the very walls I had built myself. I sat in my armchair, a blanket draped over my legs, and reread the deed Robert had gotten for me. Clause 3. Mrs. Eleanor Morales reserves the life estate of the property. Those black letters on white paper were stronger than any sales contract, stronger than my daughter's ambition, stronger than money itself. I slept very little that night. Every noise from the street put me on high alert. But when the Monday sun began to peek through, pale and washed out among the gray clouds, I was already awake. I took a cold shower because the water heater was turned off and I didn't want to risk turning it back on. But the freezing water finished waking me up. I dressed in my best suit, a pearl gray skirt and jacket combo that I wore for important weddings and funerals. I applied some light makeup, covering the dark circles from my sleepless night. I put on my fake pearls, the ones Melissa always said were old-fashioned. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I didn't look like a woman about to be evicted. I looked like the owner of the estate waiting for the property manager. At 8:30, I made myself a cup of black coffee and sat in the main armchair in the living room, right facing the front door. I placed the deed on the coffee table right next to my Bible and a fine porcelain cup. At 9 o'clock on the dot, the retirement home van drove by again. They honked the horn. I didn't move. They rang the doorbell. I didn't move. They waited for 10 minutes and then drove away. I knew they would call Melissa, and I knew that she, furious, would call the buyers to apologize and tell them the old lady was still there, begging them to handle throwing me out themselves. That was exactly what I wanted. At 9:45, a shiny, luxurious black car parked in front of my gate. Right behind it was an SUV with the Future Real Estate, LLC logo. I saw 2 men in suits step out, carrying folders under their arms, along with a young woman in high heels who looked at my front porch with a look of pure disgust, pointing at the roof and taking notes. They were the vultures. They were coming to claim their roadkill. One of the men pulled out a set of keys. They were the keys to the gold lock, the ones Melissa had handed over to them. I watched him try to unlock the gate. The key did not turn. The man frowned, struggled with it, looked at the key, then looked at the lock. I got up from my armchair, walked slowly toward the front door, and opened it wide. I stood right in the threshold, standing tall, with my hands folded in front of my stomach. All 3 of them turned to look at me. The sheer surprise on their faces was genuine. They were expecting an empty house, or at most, a terrified old woman standing by the door with her suitcases. They were not expecting a matriarch dressed to the nines blocking the entryway. "Good morning," I said, projecting my voice so it could be heard clearly all the way out to the street. "Can I help you with something?" The man in the gray suit, the one who looked like the boss, walked up to the gate. "Ma'am, good morning. There must be some kind of mistake. I am Mr. Miller, the architect representing the new owners. We have the keys and legal possession of the property as of Friday. Your daughter told us the house would be vacant today." "My daughter tends to talk a bit too much, Mr. Miller," I replied, without moving a single inch. "And regarding legal possession, I am afraid you were sold a whole lot of nothing." "Excuse me?" The man grew annoyed, pulling a piece of paper from his folder. "Look, ma'am, I understand it is hard to leave your home, but I have the notarized bill of sale right here. This house is the property of Future Real Estate, LLC. If you do not open this gate right now, I am going to have to call the police for trespassing." I smiled. That was exactly the card I was waiting for them to play. "Please, by all means do," I said sweetly. "Call the police. In fact, the chief of police is a very good friend of mine, and he would absolutely love to take a look at those papers. But before you make that call and waste your time, I highly suggest you carefully read what it is you actually bought. Because you bought the walls, yes, and you bought the roof, but the air breathed inside here and the ground I am standing on, that is entirely mine until the day I die." The woman in heels stepped forward aggressively. "What on earth is this lady talking about? Open the door. We have contractors scheduled for this afternoon. We are going to demolish the kitchen." "Nobody is demolishing anything." My voice hardened, dropping the fake sweetness. "Because if you touch a single brick of my house while I am still breathing, I will sue you for damages to my life estate. And believe me, I have a whole lot of free time and absolutely nothing to lose." Mr. Miller went pale. The term life estate hit him like a slap to the face. He turned to his partner and they began to whisper frantically, nervously flipping through the paperwork. I saw the exact moment when sheer panic replaced the arrogance in his eyes. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. "You know what? I think I will just call the police myself. That way we can clear up exactly who is trespassing on whose property." I dialed Robert's number, never taking my eyes off of them. "Chief, it's Eleanor. Yes, there are some strangers here trying to force their way through my gate. They claim they are the owners. Yes, please come over and bring your handcuffs. I think we are dealing with a major fraud issue." I hung up the phone. Mr. Miller looked at me with pure hatred, but also with a hint of respect. He knew they had made a monumental mistake by not running a thorough background check on the property deed. He knew their quick flip had just turned into a legal nightmare. "This is not over," he muttered, backing away toward his car. "We are going to call your daughter. She guaranteed delivery free of any occupants." "Call her," I said, feeling a deep, warm sense of satisfaction fill my chest. "Tell her to come down here. Tell her to bring the money, and tell her that her mother is waiting for her to have a cup of tea." I turned around and walked back into the house, shutting the heavy front door with a solid thud. I leaned against the wood, my heart pounding in my chest, not out of fear, but from the adrenaline rush of absolute victory. The trap had snapped shut. The mice were inside. And I, old Eleanor, was in total control of the maze. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. I saw the architect screaming into his phone, gesturing wildly. I knew exactly who he was screaming at. I pictured Melissa's face down at the beach. I pictured her fancy cocktail dropping right into the sand. I imagined her perfect little world crumbling to pieces. I sat down in my armchair and took a sip of my coffee. It was freezing cold, but it tasted like absolute glory. The real battle, the face-to-face confrontation with my own flesh and blood, was about to begin. But this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the judge, the jury, and if God would forgive me, the executioner of her blinding ambition. I watched from the living room window as the rain drummed against the roofs of the parked cars. Mr. Miller was still on the phone, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk like a caged lion, waving his arms around and furiously pointing at the front of my house. The young woman in heels had taken refuge inside the car, her arms crossed, wearing an expression that was an equal mix of sheer boredom and absolute panic. I, Eleanor, remained perfectly still behind the blinds, with the cold cup of coffee in my hands, feeling how the silence inside the house grew charged with static electricity, thick and heavy, like the air right before a lightning strike. I knew Melissa was on her way. I could feel her approaching in my very bones, a bitter vibration that no mother should ever have to recognize, but one that I knew entirely too well. It was the exact same feeling I used to get when she was a teenager, coming home after telling a lie, a messy combination of rushing, guilt, and defensive aggression just to cover up her fear. 40 agonizingly long minutes passed. 40 minutes where I mentally replayed my entire life inside that house. Every single brick I paid for with the aching pain in my back. Every night I spent sewing until dawn just so that little girl wouldn't have to go without a nice party dress. Every silent tear I shed when her father walked out on us. All of that condensed into a ball of ice-cold fire right in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, a red car slammed on its brakes right behind the real estate firm's SUV, skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. It was her. Melissa stepped out of the vehicle without even bothering to close the door. She was wearing a brightly colored beach wrap and a thin blouse, completely inappropriate for the massive storm that had rolled into the city. The wind whipped her hair around, messing it up instantly, but she didn't seem to care at all. Her face was flushed red, not from the sun down at the beach, but from an uncontrollable, burning rage. She sprinted toward the iron gate, completely ignoring the architect who tried to intercept her. "Mom!" she screamed, grabbing the metal bars with both hands and shaking them violently. "Mom, open this damn gate right now!" The metallic clatter echoed in my chest, but my feet stayed firmly planted. I set the coffee cup down on the table, smoothed out my pearl gray skirt, took a deep breath, filling my lungs with pure dignity, and walked slowly toward the entrance. I opened the main wooden door, but I stopped right at the security gate that separated the porch from the front yard. From there, about 15 feet away from the street gate where she was screaming, I looked right at her. "There is no need to scream, Melissa," I said in a perfectly calm voice, even though inside I was breaking into a million little pieces. "The neighbors have ears, and so do I." "No need to scream," she shrieked, her eyes wide and wild. "Who do you think you are, changing the locks? I sold this house. I got you a luxurious room at the retirement home, and you repay me by making me look like a complete idiot in front of the investors." Mr. Miller walked up to her, cutting her tantrum short. "Melissa, this is absolutely unacceptable," the man said, his voice shaking like someone watching his massive commission evaporate into thin air. "You guaranteed us immediate possession. You told us the property was entirely vacant. Your mother is saying she refuses to leave, and she's throwing around legal terms you conveniently failed to mention." Melissa turned toward him, a fake nervous smile plastered across her face. "Please don't listen to her, Mr. Miller. My mother, you know how old age is. Sometimes she rambles. She gets overly attached to old things. It is just senile dementia, poor thing. She has no idea what she's talking about." I froze. Senile dementia. Just like that, she discarded me. That was how fast she was willing to erase my sanity just to save her own skin. That was the absolute last straw. Any drop of pity I could have possibly felt for her evaporated in an instant. I marched right up to the main gate, ending up face to face with my daughter, separated only by the cold, wet iron bars. The pouring rain soaked us both, but I didn't even blink. "Look me straight in the eyes, Melissa," I ordered. My voice came out guttural, deep, a voice I didn't even know I possessed. "Look me in the eyes and say to my face that I am crazy. Say it." She hesitated. For a fraction of a second, I saw the little girl who used to hide behind my skirts when it thundered outside. But that little girl didn't exist anymore. In her place stood a woman entirely consumed by greed. "Mom, please do not make this any harder than it has to be," she whispered, lowering her voice so the men wouldn't hear her. "Just open the gate. Let us inside. Sign the turnover papers and just go to the retirement home. They are going to treat you wonderfully. I even used some of the leftover money to buy you some brand new clothes." "The leftover money?" I repeated, tasting pure bile in the back of my throat. "The money from selling off my life?" I pulled the document Robert had retrieved for me out of my pocket. I unfolded it carefully, shielding it from the rain with my hand, and pressed it flat against the iron bars so she could see it clearly. "Read it, Melissa." She frowned, squinting her eyes against the rain. "What is that?" "It is old paper. It is my divorce settlement deed. The one you never bothered to actually read when you tricked me into signing that power of attorney in the hospital." The architect, driven by a mix of curiosity and pure panic, stepped closer and read over my daughter's shoulder. His eyes went wide as saucers. "Life estate granted to the spouse," he read out loud, and every last drop of color drained from his face. Oh my God! Melissa looked back and forth between the two of us, totally confused, wearing that arrogant ignorance of someone who genuinely believes the world revolves around her whims. And why does that even matter? I have the power of attorney. I sold the house. The sale is 100% legal. Right at that moment, Robert's cruiser, which had been waiting discreetly around the corner, flipped its lights on. He didn't blip the siren, just the red and blue lights spinning silently in the pouring storm. The car rolled forward slowly and parked right behind Melissa's vehicle. Robert stepped out, adjusting his police cap. He walked with a steady, firm stride, carrying that quiet authority you only get from decades on the force. He stood right beside my gate on the outside of the bars, looking directly at my daughter. "Good morning, Melissa," he said dryly. "Chief," she stammered, taking a step back. "Robert, what are you doing here? My mom called you, didn't she? Tell her to open the gate. Tell her this house isn't hers anymore." Robert shook his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. "That is where you are dead wrong, kiddo. The sale you made is technically valid, yes. You sold the bare ownership, but you missed a very crucial detail. Your mother holds the life estate." "And what does that mean in plain English?" she shrieked, totally losing her composure. "It means," I interrupted, with a sharp clarity that cut through the heavy air like a knife, "that you successfully sold the empty shell, but the nut is still inside. It means that as long as I draw breath, And trust me, I plan on breathing for a very long time. This house is my castle. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out, and absolutely nobody knocks down a single wall without my explicit permission. And I, my dear daughter, do not give you permission. The silence that followed was absolute. All you could hear was the pouring rain and Melissa's heavy, panicked breathing. Mr. Miller reacted first. He spun toward Melissa with volcanic fury. "Did you know about this?" he screamed at her, backing her into her own car. "You sold us a property with a lifelong occupant. That is massive fraud. You purposefully hid a major encumbrance on the title." "No, I swear I didn't know," Melissa stammered, her hands visibly shaking. "The notary never told me anything about it. I just wanted to sell the place." The contract explicitly stipulated immediate delivery, completely free of any occupants, the man roared. "We paid top dollar for an empty house to flip, not a private nursing home with an old lady living inside it. Our investment is completely dead in the water, as long as she is alive." Melissa looked at me, desperately searching for some kind of salvation. Her eyes, which just moments ago were filled with total contempt, were now swimming in pure, unadulterated terror. "Mom, tell them you are going to leave. Tell them you are waiving the life estate. Just sign a piece of paper right here, right now, please. I already spent part of the money. I had to pay off Richard's gambling debts. We bought a brand new car." The confession spilled out of her mouth like vomit. Gambling debts, a brand new car. So that was what my 72 years of backbreaking effort had turned into. Casino chips and shiny metal for her useless husband. I felt an infinite sense of pity, but not for myself. I felt pity for her. Pity for the incredibly hollow woman I had somehow raised. "I am not signing anything, Melissa," I said, and my voice never wavered. "I am not giving up a roof over my head just so you can keep patching up holes you never bothered to dig yourself." "They are going to sue me," she bawled, grabbing handfuls of her own hair. "If I have to return the house, I have to give back the money plus the penalty fees. I don't have that kind of money, Mom. They are going to throw me in jail." The architect nodded ruthlessly. "You can bet your life on that, ma'am. If you do not wire back the full transfer amount, plus the 20% penalty for breach of contract within 48 hours, my legal team is going to hit you with a lawsuit for fraud and damages that will leave you absolutely homeless. And believe me, Future Real Estate, LLC, does not lose court cases." Melissa collapsed, literally. Her legs gave out and she fell to her knees on the soaking wet sidewalk, staining her beach wrap with mud. She was bawling loudly, an ugly, hysterical cry, like a spoiled little girl who just had her favorite toy broken. "Mom, please help me. I am your daughter. You cannot do this to me," she begged, reaching her hands out toward me through the iron bars. I looked down at her hands. The exact same hands that had changed the locks yesterday. The exact same hands that had packed all my precious memories into boxes labeled as trash. The exact same hands that had signed away my banishment without even a slight tremor in their pulse. Robert looked at me, waiting to see my reaction. He knew I had a soft heart. He knew that my entire life I had sacrificed my own well-being for the very woman currently dragging herself through the mud. But something fundamental had shifted inside of me. The Eleanor who forgave absolutely everything had died inside the church on Sunday morning. The woman standing on the porch was someone else entirely. She was a survivor. I stepped closer to the bars. I crouched down just a bit to be closer to her eye level, even though the iron gate stood between us. "You are right, Melissa. You are my daughter," I said softly. "And because you are my daughter, and because I truly love you, I am going to give you the most important lesson of your entire life. A lesson I should have taught you years ago, instead of just handing you cash and bailing you out." She lifted her head, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks, fully expecting me to pull out my checkbook or sign the legal papers, fully expecting her usual rescue. "What? What are you going to do?" she whimpered. "I am going to let you face the consequences of your own actions," I sentenced. The words came out heavy and absolute, as final as tombstones. "You sold the house. You cashed the check. You spent the money. Now you fix the problem with these gentlemen." "But I don't have the money," she howled. "They are going to take everything from me." "Then you will finally learn what it means to start over from scratch, just like I had to do when your father walked out on us," I replied, standing back up straight. "You will learn how hard it is to earn every single penny, and you will learn that family is not for sale." I turned to face the architect, who was watching the scene unfold with a bizarre mix of extreme discomfort and total fascination. "Mr. Miller, I highly suggest you settle your legal affairs with the seller far away from my property. You are disturbing the peace, and I really need to get some rest. Stress is simply not good for a woman my age." The man nodded, almost with a sense of reverence. "Understood, Miss Eleanor. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Then he grabbed Melissa by the arm and yanked her to her feet. "We are going down to our corporate office, ma'am, right now. We have a lot of paperwork to go over." "No, Mom, Robert, do something!" Melissa screamed as she struggled against his grip. Robert just crossed his arms, totally impassive. "I am sorry, Melissa. This is a civil matter between private parties. As long as there is no physical violence, I simply cannot intervene. And your mother is well within her legal rights." I watched them drag her toward the real estate company's SUV. I watched her stare at me through the back window as they drove her away, her face frozen in an expression of absolute disbelief. She never thought the meek old lady actually had teeth. She never once imagined that the Bible I carried around also preached about divine justice and driving the greedy merchants right out of the temple. When the cars faded into the distance and the street was completely empty once again, Robert walked up to the gate. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" he asked softly. I felt my legs start to tremble now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I leaned against the brick pillar. "No, Robert, I am not all right. My soul hurts. Watching your own child fall is the greatest pain in the world." "I know. But you saved her, Eleanor. Even if she doesn't realize it today. If you had bailed her out again, she would never have stopped being a parasite. Today you finally forced her to grow up." I nodded, wiping away a single solitary tear that mixed with the rain on my cheek. "Do you think she is going to go to jail?" "She will probably manage to reach a settlement," Robert said, scratching his chin. "She will have to sell her brand new car, maybe take out a second mortgage on her own house, and pay back every last penny. She is going to be swimming in massive debt and total shame. But jail time? Highly unlikely if she pays them back. One thing is for sure, though. Her life of luxury at your expense is officially over." I sighed. A long, incredibly deep sigh that seemed to empty my lungs of years of accumulated anxiety. "Thank you, my friend." "Don't thank me, I was just doing my job. Plus, I really enjoyed seeing that architect's face when you dropped that clause on him." He smiled warmly. "Now, get back inside before you catch a cold, and lock up tight." "Double deadbolt," I promised. Robert climbed back into his cruiser and drove off. I stood all alone in my front yard. The rain was beginning to let up, turning into a fine, sparkling drizzle. I looked at my house. It was still standing right there. My walls, my roof, my battered rose bushes, which, I knew, deep down, would absolutely bloom again if I just gave them a little love. I went inside and closed the heavy front door. The solid click of the brand new lock was the most beautiful sound in the entire world. I walked into the living room. It was completely full of boxes. Messy, cold, but it was entirely mine. I walked over to the box labeled trash, where Melissa had thrown my photo albums. I carefully pulled one out and opened it up. There was a picture of Melissa as a baby, smiling brightly in her crib. I gently stroked the image with my thumb. "I forgive you, sweet girl. I whispered to the yellowed photograph. "I forgive you because you had no idea what you were doing. But I am absolutely not going to let you destroy me." I sat down in my armchair, completely surrounded by the cardboard boxes that were the silent witnesses to both ultimate betrayal and sweet victory. I felt utterly exhausted, like I had just run a marathon, but I also felt a strange, solid sense of peace. It was the peace of someone who had stared right into the abyss and never blinked once. I had won back my house, but, much more importantly, I had won back myself. I was no longer the pesky old lady in the way. I was Eleanor Morales, the master of her own destiny. And even though my heart ached endlessly from the cruelty of my own flesh and blood, I knew that pain was simply the price of my absolute freedom. The landline phone, which I had plugged back in that morning, started to ring. I stared at it. I knew it wasn't Melissa. She was going to be far too busy trying to save her own neck. It could be anyone. I just let it ring while I brewed myself another cup of coffee. This time, I would make sure to drink it while it was hot. The storm had passed, and even though the sky was still gray, I knew that tomorrow, inevitably, the sun would rise over my house. My house. The silence that settled over the house after the cars drove away and the rain finally stopped wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness. It was the fertile silence of the earth right after a massive storm. It was a clean, washed stillness. I stood right in the middle of the living room, surrounded by those cardboard boxes my daughter had labeled, with her rushed, cruel handwriting. And for the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fill with my very own air, not the borrowed, leftover air people leave you when they assume you are no longer of any use. I spent the next 3 days dedicated to a single monumental task, the unpacking of my life. It was not an easy job. Melissa had been incredibly meticulous in her contempt. In the box marked as trash, I found not only the photo albums, but also the letters my father had written to me from up north when he left for work back in the 50s, and my first communion veil, yellowed by time but perfectly intact. Every single object I pulled out was a complete vindication. As I placed my mother's portrait back on the fireplace mantel, I swear I felt her wink at me from the great beyond. And when I returned my threads and needles to the old wooden sewing box, I felt my hands regain all their old dexterity. Robert kept his word. The patrol cruiser drove by every single hour during that first week, and he would come by personally in the afternoons, using the excuse of checking if the new lock was working properly, even though I knew full well he was just coming to make sure my heart hadn't completely collapsed after my victory. Word around town is that Mr. Miller was practically foaming at the mouth down at the notary's office, Robert told me on Wednesday as we drank coffee and ate vanilla cookies. It seems your daughter had to sign away things she didn't even own just to avoid criminal charges. What happened to her? I asked, trying to make my voice sound perfectly neutral, even though deep down I felt a painful tug in my chest. A mother is a mother, even when the child turns out crooked. She had to return the money in full, and since they had already blown a chunk of it on her husband's gambling debts and the down payment on the new car, they had to sell the car for pennies on the dollar and take out a predatory loan just to cover the difference. That 20% penalty left her shaking, Eleanor. They were wiped out of all their savings and stuck with a massive debt that will easily take them 5 years to pay off. I nodded, watching the steam rise from my mug. That is the cost of tuition, Robert. The University of Life is extremely expensive, especially when you try to skip the ethics classes. Has she called you? No, and I honestly prefer that she doesn't for a while. I need to heal my own wounds before I even try to patch up hers. The true transformation of my life didn't happen all at once, like it does in the movies. It was a slow, daily process, built out of tiny acts of total sovereignty. First, I hired a painter. Not just anyone, but Arthur, an old acquaintance from the neighborhood. I asked him to paint the front of the house a soft peach color, erasing forever the dirty white it had been for years. I wanted my house to shine brightly. I wanted it so that when Melissa drove down the street, because I knew that sooner or later she would see that the house wasn't dying. It was being reborn. Then I did something I had put off for years just to save up money for an inheritance. I went down to the appliance store and bought myself a brand new washing machine, one of those fancy automatic ones that does absolutely everything for you. Melissa always complained that my old washer made too much noise, but she never once offered to buy me a new one. Well, now I was buying it for myself. I used the cash I had hidden under the mattress, that little emergency fund my daughter had coveted so much but had never managed to find. But the biggest change happened 2 weeks later when I decided to reopen my sewing room. For years I had sewn just to survive. I hemmed pants, sewed on buttons, fixed broken zippers. It was a grueling job that left me with pricked fingers and tired eyes. But this time was entirely different. This time, I pulled out my stored fabrics, those gorgeous silks and linens I had been hoarding for a special occasion, and I decided that the special occasion was today. I placed a small, elegant sign in my front window. Eleanor Morales. Custom tailoring and alterations. Knitting classes available. I didn't do it for the money, although extra cash never hurts. I did it because I desperately needed the house to be filled with people. I didn't want to sit around all alone chewing on my own misery, and boy, did it work. At first, the nosy neighbors showed up, dying to know all the juicy details about the massive scandal with the real estate firm. I welcomed them in with a bright smile and hot coffee, but whenever they asked about Melissa, I answered with pure elegance. My daughter and I had a minor business misunderstanding, but thank God, everything is perfectly sorted out now. And then I would instantly change the subject. Slowly but surely, the gossip lost its steam, and what remained was a genuine community. I started having 3 or 4 young women sitting in my living room in the afternoons, learning how to crochet and knit. The sound of their laughter, the clinking of teacups, and the soft click-clack of the knitting needles completely chased away the nasty ghosts Melissa had left behind. A month after the incident, on a rainy afternoon remarkably similar to that fateful Sunday, the doorbell rang. I knew exactly who it was before I even opened the door. There was a hesitant, faltering rhythm to the ringing, a deep hesitation that you don't get from salesmen or chatty neighbors. I opened the door. Melissa was standing right there, completely soaked, without an umbrella. There was absolutely no trace left of the haughty, arrogant woman in the bright beach wrap. She was wearing a pair of faded jeans and a plain t-shirt. She'd clearly lost weight, and the dark circles under her eyes were incredibly deep, as dark as fresh bruises. Her shiny red car was nowhere in sight. She had taken the public bus. We stared at each other in total silence for what felt like an eternity. She was probably expecting me to slam the door in her face or to scream at her. "Come in," I simply said, stepping out of the way. She walked inside, dripping water all over the floor I had just finished waxing. She stood frozen on the welcome mat, completely hunched over, staring at the freshly painted walls in the living room, the curtains that were back in their rightful place, the large vase filled with fresh flowers. "The house looks really beautiful, Mom," she mumbled, her voice breaking. "It was always beautiful, Melissa. You just had to look at it with love, instead of looking at it with dollar signs in your eyes." She broke down crying. It wasn't the ugly, hysterical wailing from that day out front with the real estate agents. It was a silent, utterly defeated cry, the weeping of someone who had truly hit rock bottom. She covered her face with her hands. "We lost everything, Mom." "Richard is gone. He walked out on me the second the loan money ran out. He said he couldn't live with a woman who let herself get scammed by her own mother. He took whatever little we had left of any value. I am living in a rented room on the south side of town. I am 2 months behind on rent." I looked at her, and my motherly heart bled. I desperately wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her that none of it mattered, that she could move right back into her childhood bedroom, that I would take care of her. It was pure instinct. The deep biological programming to protect your offspring at all costs. But then I looked down at my hands, those strong, aging hands that had single-handedly defended my roof. I remembered the architect, the cardboard boxes marked as trash, the changed lock. If I let her move back in right now, if I rescued her all over again, I would be teaching her that betraying me had zero real-world consequences. I would be teaching her that I was her eternal safety net, and the day I finally passed away, she would free fall into the void without any idea how to fly. I walked into the kitchen and served a deep bowl of hot lentil soup with some freshly baked bread. I set it down on the table. "Sit down and eat," I told her. She sat down and ate with a ravenous, almost animalistic hunger. When she finished, she looked up at me with begging eyes. "Mom, can I please stay here? Just for a little while. Just until I find a job. I promise I won't be a bother. I will sleep on the couch if you want me to." I took a very deep breath. This was the final test, and undoubtedly the hardest one. "No, Melissa." The word hung suspended in the heavy air. She blinked, totally in shock. "What? You are going to throw me out on the street? Your own daughter?" "I am not throwing you out on the street. You have 2 perfectly healthy legs and 2 healthy hands. You have a college degree that I paid for with the sweat off my own brow. You have your health. When I was your age, I already had you. I was divorced, and I was up sewing until 3 in the morning just to pay the mortgage on this house. Nobody ever gifted me a roof, sweetheart, and I'm certainly not going to gift you mine just so you can hide from your own mistakes. But I am all alone, Mom." Loneliness is an incredible teacher, Melissa. Use it. I stood up and went over to my coin purse. I pulled out some cash, just enough to cover 1 month of rent for her room and enough groceries to last a few weeks. It wasn't a fortune by any means, but it was a dignified, decent push. "Here." I pressed the bills into the palm of her hand. "This is so you can stabilize yourself, pay your rent, look for a job, and when you finally have a steady paycheck, when you have earned your dignity back through your own hard work, then you can come visit me, and I will welcome you with open arms as a guest. But this house is mine, and as long as I am breathing, I am the only one who decides who gets to sleep under my roof." Melissa looked down at the money, and then she looked right at me. I saw real anger in her eyes. Yes, but I also saw something else. Absolute respect. For the first time in her entire life, she wasn't looking at me like a disposable resource. She was looking at me like a woman made of iron. "You are hard, Mom," she said, pocketing the cash. "I am fair, honey, and sometimes fairness hurts much worse than a punishment." She walked out into the rain, but this time she walked a little taller. I hadn't saved her, but I had firmly pushed her to start saving herself. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I felt zero guilt. I just felt an immense, overwhelming peace. The months rolled by, and life took on a brand new, sweet, and steady rhythm. Robert retired from the precinct that winter. He started coming over much more often, no longer wearing his uniform but dressed in plaid flannel shirts and a short-brimmed hat. Together, we fixed up the backyard. He would dig through the hard dirt, and I would plant the new rose bushes. "You know what, Eleanor," he told me one afternoon while we were cleaning off the gardening tools, "I never thought I would end my days planting flowers. I always figured I would go out in some crazy shootout. And I thought I would end my days babysitting grandkids or watching soap operas," I replied, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "But look at us now. Life had a second youth waiting for us all along." Robert gently took my hand. His fingers were rough, but so incredibly warm. "I don't know about youth, Eleanor, but it is certainly damn good company. And that is worth more than all the gold in the world. There were no massive declarations of love, no late-in-life weddings. At our age, love isn't about setting off bright fireworks. It is a steady, glowing ember that keeps your feet warm in the dead of winter. Robert became my loyal companion, my guardian, and my absolute best friend. We ate dinner together, we went to church on Sundays, and sometimes we would just sit out on the front porch and watch the people walk by, quietly criticizing the neighbors and laughing together like two mischievous kids. Melissa ended up getting a job at a local accounting firm. I found out because one of my knitting students mentioned it to me. It took her 6 full months to come visit me again. When she finally did, she brought a chocolate cake, and she didn't ask for a single thing. We talked about the weather, the local news, about absolutely everything except the past. Our relationship was never the same again. The innocence was permanently shattered, but in its place, a very adult arrangement grew. Distant, but cordial. She finally understood that I was not her personal ATM, and I finally understood that she was not just an extension of myself. We were two grown women separated by our choices, yet united by a bloodline that, even if it occasionally turns to muddy water, never completely stops running. Today, as I sit here at my desk by the window, I watch the autumn leaves fall onto the sidewalk, that very same sidewalk where I once sat and cried with a Bible in my hands, truly believing that my life was over. I am 73 years old now. My knees ache whenever the humidity rises, and I absolutely need my reading glasses just to thread a needle. But I am the undisputed owner of my own castle. My name is right there on the deed, my money is safely tucked inside my purse, and my conscience is crystal clear. Sometimes I think about that life estate, 2 cold, strictly legal words, but to me, they mean so much more. They mean that my life, my decades of hard work, and my very presence hold a true value that absolutely cannot be bought or sold. I am Eleanor Morales. This is my house, and right here, on my land and under my roof, I am the queen, and nobody had better ever dare try to change my locks again.